Take a look at this now. The ANC's National Working Committee has been holding talks over what has now become controversial. This is the step-aside or the step-down rule. It's believed that it comes as some party members have posed more questions on the need to have clarity around its implementation. Well, joining us for this conversation tonight is the ANC's presidency head, Sibongile Besani. Mr. Besani, good evening to you. Thank you for your time tonight. It's interesting how controversial this issue has become. Earlier on in the week, I talked about a step aside, and a senior ANC member said to me, it's not actually a step aside rule, it's a step down rule. There's no way in the manifesto where we talk about step aside. But it speaks to the level of contestation around what should actually happen to members of the ANC that are finding themselves mired in controversy, and perhaps even a step further than that, facing charges within the courts, and whether these individuals should still be holding senior positions and should still be allowed to contest for senior positions in the party.
Look, indeed, it's a matter that the organization is looking into, that loophole, but most importantly, we should take note that as the ANC, we committed ourselves to take the war, the battle against corruption, and we developed this step-aside position. And this step-aside position or decision is not a disciplinary process. It's a process where members are expected, to step aside whilst they are dealing with their personal matters, especially that relates to their indictment in the courts of law. So it's very clear that the two previous conferences, in Mpumalanga and eThekwini, have actually exposed the loophole where the issue of nomination of a person who's facing such indictment, that loophole was not closed. And the National Executive Committee will actually ventilate on it. It is a loophole that was not really tightened and not deliberately, but it was expected that, or believed that whenever members are faced with this situation, the step-aside should also sort of evoke or invoke, political consciousness to those individuals.
How is it a loophole? Because if it's clear that an individual should step aside, that in and of itself suggests that you cannot actively be participating within some of these processes until you have dealt with whatever matters you need to deal with. So explain how this loophole is manifesting itself in the nominations process, because again, these individuals that find themselves on this list, it's not a surprise, especially to people like you at the headquarters of the ANC, because you get to see these nominations prior to the votes actually taking place. And yet, after the fact, you then have the president of the organization calling for reflections. But these are situations that you watch unfold, you wait to see happen, and then are trying to be seen to be doing something about it. There's so many contradictions that are taking place here.
No, it's not true that Luthuli House or NEC gets to see nominations before the conference. Remember, the process of nominations is handled by a special institution or election committee. And those nominations are taking place at the branch level, and they are opened by that particular election committee that deals with the process. And at the conference, the nominations are then disclosed, not by the NEC, not by any deployee. So it's not like it is the election committee that will tell that who has qualified, who has not qualified at the conference.
So are you saying...
So it must be clear that the NEC or Luthuli House does not handle the election process.
No, fair enough, but are there no NEC members that sit on these provincial election committees?
No. Mm-hmm. There is a special, something like a service provider that handles that, ASA. What happens, NEC members sit only during the election process when already we are at conference. Okay. They are not that as part of the steering committee or also, not during the nomination process and so on.
So effectively, you're saying that you've left it up to the branches then to not consider or to not nominate people who should be or who have stepped aside?
Basically, we believe that the step aside, as it has been prescribed, we believed that members of the ANC would, in their consciousness, understand how far it goes. But indications are that that was not to be. But we are encouraged by the fact that that does not in any way dispel the notion that the ANC does fight corruption. You know, it doesn't, because it is a loophole and the ANC is going to reflect on it.
How does it not tell you that the ANC is, you know, effectively committed to fighting corruption when your branches are saying that, yes, we recognize that these individuals have stepped aside and that they are caught up in whatever controversies it may be, but we still want to elect them to these senior positions within the movement? How does that not send a message that says this organization is actually not serious about fighting corruption?
Look, we'll not be defensive of any action from any quarter that makes a mockery of our commitment to fighting corruption. But it is important also to underscore the point that the step-aside decision should be seen in the context of the whole renewal process of the ANC, which is progressing at a what I will call structural level, be it in terms of what we have done to date, you know, putting up new systems, membership system, putting the renewal commission, and then improving the area of election and selection of those who are going to be public in public office. Now, when a loophole arises or a weakness arises in terms of our procedure, that does not mean that organization does not demonstrate commitment. But we believe that we still have to take this renewal further at a level of what is called a software level, where even at a principle dealing with the value systems of the organization and internalization of ethics in the organization. So it has to be taken further to that extent. At the moment, what has happened is that these members, even though they have stepped aside, they have constitutional right to elect or to be elected because they are not suspended. That is why we say it's not a disciplinary process. That is why the NEC has to reflect on it, because in one way that it does not reflect positive, as you have questioned now, positively to the image of the ANC.
How much of this is also as a result of what is now viewed as a haphazard application of the rules in as far as who must step aside? Just this Monday, there were yet more meetings, the NWC meeting to discuss what should be the fate of the ANC Women's League President, Batabile Dlamini. What happened in those meetings?
No, the step-aside rule is not implemented haphazardly. The rule is very clear that if you are facing charges of corruption and in the courts of law and you are indicted, you have to step aside. But if, for instance, there are allegations about you on the issues of corruption and so on, and you are not in the courts of law, you've got to take initiative or to go to the Integrity Commission, and on the basis of the recommendation of the Integrity Commission, the ANC, the NEC will then take decisions. So it's not implemented haphazardly. It is very clear.
Batabile Dlamini was not only charged with perjury, but she has now been found guilty of perjury, convicted of perjury, and subsequently fined for that crime.
Yes.
And yet there's still a discussion over what must happen. How is that not a haphazard application of the rules?
It's not a haphazard because everybody in the NEC, in the ANC, knows what to do. And you see
No, tell us as members of the public, because we are not privy to those conversations. So we work on what we see that is in the public. So from an outsider looking in, it doesn't make sense to me. So you can help explain what the thinking then is of the ANC around this issue.
Okay, let's take for an example the constitutional prerogative, the South African constitutional rights of a person who has been found guilty with a fine and a person who has been found guilty without a fine. Those two people are treated quite differently. That is why the NEC felt that this matter has got to be navigated a bit differently. Because if you look at the Constitution, if you are found guilty for more than 12 months without a fine, there are areas that you don't have to. That is the Constitution of the country. But if you are found guilty with a fine, you know,
but what does the ANC Constitution say? I hear you on the Constitution of the country, and the thing is, if we go there, we're going to enter muddy waters, because even this issue of step aside was challenged on its constitutionality before the country's court. So I don't want us to venture there. I want us to stick within the organization. If somebody is charged, and this happened for some time, nothing happened, found guilty now, convicted, where does that lie in the whole issue of step aside?
No, obviously, the step aside is very clear, but let me just...
When you say it's very clear, what does it say?
No, let me start here. The ANC Constitution is not above the Constitution of the country. Now, the step aside has been challenged in the courts of law, and the courts so far have found this matter of the step aside to be in tandem with the prescripts of the ANC Constitution. So it's not at variance with what the ANC has sort of committed itself to do. Now, if you have been found, you have been charged with corruption, the step aside is very clear that you cannot participate in the activities of the organization. Now, because of this constitutional issue that we have, the NEC felt that we needed to make sure that the conversation with the president of the Women's League has got to be held. Because if members, for instance, there are instances where members know clearly what the step aside or the constitution of the ANC says. And those members, some of them did not step aside. Therefore, certain clauses of the constitution of the ANC were invoked.
So are you saying that because she was found guilty on perjury and not corruption, she's not expected to step aside?
But she was found guilty, and after being found guilty, she was fined. So, the Constitution, listen, she was fined.
I really think it's semantics.
No, it's not. The Constitution of the country, for instance, does allow you to be a leader in the country if you have been found...
Yes, but where's that caveat in the step-aside rule in the ANC?
It has to be subservient to the Constitution of the country.
No, but where is the caveat in the actual rule?
No.
So is this something that you brought up now on consideration of this particular matter? So if somebody else is charged tomorrow and found guilty and given a sentence with the option of the fine, does it mean that the same rules will apply to them as are applying to the ANC Women's League president? And why is that not disclosed from the onset? Why is that only coming up now? That no, but there's the issue of a conviction with a fine, you know, a sentencing with the option of a fine. So if it's got a fine, then, you know, it's not so bad. We can accommodate it. So we won't want you to...
But can I ask you a question? What does the Constitution of the country say about a person who's found guilty with a fine and without a fine? Let alone constitutions of parties that are subservient to the Constitution of the country. I would have a problem if you want to you discuss in such a way that you want to totally disregard the overriding laws of the country. Because,
I'm not disregarding
you
anything.
are.
I'm trying to understand the formulation of the policy. I'm trying to make sense of what you are saying to me.
What I'm saying to you, you have the Constitution of the country. Every party in South Africa has got to make its rules in such a way that they comply with the rules of the country.
Okay.
Now, you are arguing such a way that whatever, as long as the ANC says this, therefore it applies. No, the ANC has got to navigate in line with, has got to align with the Constitution of the country. That's the point I'm saying.
We're out of time, but just very quickly, what does this mean now? What must she do? What does the ANC expect Bathabile Dlamini to do?
No, it's not the issue about Bathabile Dlamini only. The issue here is that we have to fight against corruption. And there is a loophole that has been identified. And we have to act in such a way that whatever steps we take on the fight against corruption, they don't make mockery
yes, but
of the rules.
Specifically about the Batabile Dlamini issue, because it's been one of the big
no,
issues.
It's not the only thing. That is why when we talk our policies and decisions, we've got to take account of experiences of what have happened throughout the last 2 weeks or so. So we can't confine it to...
I'm not going to get an answer of you clearly. We're completely out of time. ANC Head of Presidency, Sibongile Besani, we're going to have to leave it there. Valen is standing by with a look at your sport after this.